Belinda Hernandez-Arriaga, who is a faculty coordinator of the Masters in Counseling MFT program at USF South Bay location. Belinda has a doctorate in education and is a licensed clinical social worker with 18 years of experience working in community mental health, with a specialization in child trauma and Latino mental health. Belinda has extensive experience in county mental health, where she worked in Santa Clara County Juvenile Hall Mental Health and in San Mateo County to 3 high-risk infant mental health team. Quite an extensive bio, so I'm just going to cut right to the important part. Her current research is focused on understanding the emotional, psychological, and traumatic experiences that impact undocumented and mixed status Latino youth. Belinda's work also focuses on understanding the cultural arts as a healing space for this community of children. Linda is committed to a social justice advocacy and multicultural practices in counseling that gives voice to underground communities and expand indigenous cultural practices in the field of counseling. She and her husband have 3 young daughters and live on the coastal community of Half Bay Moon. Wonderful. So I hope you're not affected too much by the Northern California wildfires. We welcome you. She's going to talk to us specifically this evening on newcomer refugee children in the Bay Area. And over to you, Belinda. Looking forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all, and truly an honor to be part of this panel and visiting with you all today. I've been working for the last couple of years, specifically at the South Texas border with refugee children and families coming from different countries, around the world, but specifically mostly Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, Salvador, Nicaragua, Venezuela. And so we have been part of the team called the Bay Area Border Relief Team that we formed as part of Senator Jackie Spears' first trip to the border when the children were being placed in cages. And as a result of that trip, she came back and a group of women, came together and said, let's see what we can do to make change and really try to understand what's happening with the newcomer children and families and go to the border and start working. Well, lo and behold, what happened is we ended up staying there for 2 years and conditions got worse and worse that ended children not just separated from families, but 2 years of living in horrible makeshift tent camps that really just tore through our hearts to see what the children and families and asylum seekers, individuals and elders were going through, apart from all the horrific acts of separation and forced displacement and deportation and aggressive ICE tactics that, impact the well-being and the psychological well-being of asylum seekers. So as a result, I've really been able to dive deeply into understanding the asylum seeker child and family, but also to welcoming them into the United States. As we have followed their journeys for 2 years, we ended up creating a pipeline here to the United States, here to specifically the Bay Area, where we've welcomed about, I think it's been about 40 plus children over the last couple of months, and really been able to see what their experiences were there and how they come, and then what their needs are here. And I just want to begin this conversation before I show my PowerPoint by saying, there was a little girl that, the many little girls and children and little boys and families, and specifically, I remember this one moment where I was at the border and I was working with the children. They were doing art with me and sharing their story and painting their stories and their messages of SOS, literally saying we need help. When it dawned on me that one day they were going to come, hopefully they were going to cross that border and they were going to come into the US, and they were going to all of a sudden be sitting in classrooms, and no one was going to know none of their story, none of what they've gone through. Like, they would be an everyday child that would seemingly be happy and smiling and functioning. But this reality of the horrific experiences of what they lived and endured for 2 years plus, pre-migration, no one would really understand unless they shared. And I don't think that was easily going to just happen. And it really brings to the conversation, how do we prepare? How do we hold their voices and their space in our classrooms? How do we consider, who is this child in front of me? And how do we really think about the counseling services that we need to add, or how we shift and rethink through this? So I'm going to share a little bit with you all. I know we're limited on time, so there will be some that I will skip. But I call this presentation Zapatito Journeys, and Zapatito means shoes. Zapato means shoes in Spanish, Zapatito Journeys, because one day I was helping, we worked at Sister Norma Pimentel at the Humanitarian Center in McAllen for the first part of a year in 2018. We're still working, there with her in different ways. And once they were forced into MPP, we worked across the border in Mexico. But one day we were in the clothing closet giving out shoes to families. And there was a dad that came for his little boy. I think he must have been about 2 years old. And the dad said, he really needs shoes. Do you have a pair of shoes for him? Because look at his shoes. They're worn from the long journey that he had been walking from Honduras to the Mexican border. 2 years old. And in my hand, he put his shoe, and the shoe was completely worn at the bottom. There was nothing there. And I remember getting that shoe, and we were taking the shoe and giving them a new shoe. And then I realized after him, all the little shoes that were getting turned in for new shoes, that I thought, wow, these shoes have a journey. They could tell a story, right? They hold so many secrets. And so with that, I call it Zapatito Journeys, thinking about, where have these little shoes been, but where have these little ones been? And under it is todos somos humanos, which we are all human. And I think that's really the message that I want to impart. Because I put, our work begins with breaking through walls of exclusion, re-welcoming the newcomer. Understanding the story of the newcomer as one that begins and ends with different intersections and pathways is so important as we prepare for the work ahead with the individuals, the family, or the children. And, sometimes, and I think most of the time they enter, there is no welcome for them, right? They're coming in, whether through ICE, through Border Patrol entry of really complicated spaces, through asylum where they just passed through, and they land in the US, and here they are. And then somehow along the way, they land in classrooms, right? They land in communities, and no one says to them, welcome, right? Because they blend in, they become part of the fabric of our society. But I really do believe that in your work with them, part of the work is to say, bienvenido, welcome to this space, welcome to this school, welcome to this journey with me in this counseling practice, welcome to my classroom. Like, I think there's a welcome that everyone is waiting for and hungry for, as many times they are seen as the other, they are seen as criminal, they are vilified in the media. There's so many things that they have, like, negative images that they've been forced to embrace as people see them, but it's not them, right? And so they're resilient, they're beautiful, they're strong, they're human, they're suffering, but yet they're rich with culture, rich with they were in their countries where they come from. They were moms, dads, uncles, grandparents, tias, cousins, children, laughing, leaders, church leaders, teachers, lawyers, and then they come, and it's like, how do we welcome them? And so I think that's one of the big pieces to say, welcome. Um, this is a picture of the children bathing in the Rio Grande River there, and as part of coming as asylum seekers in this horrible 2-year Trump MPP journey that they had to stay in Mexico. And I do want to say that there's many still there now. They were having to bathe in the Rio Grande River, where there's a lot of illness, even alligators. So, the journey is about, for so many, trauma, because they come from, I call it paso uno, consider the loss of leaving home and familia. I think for so many, it's important to think in the counseling space of how there's grief of leaving home. And a lot of people say, like, I've heard, why do they come? There's so many. Why is this happening? But what people don't get to hear are the stories of sadness of having to be forced to leave, the stories of saying, I never wanted to leave my country, but I'm having to be forced to come here to save my life, to save my children. So, their journey begins with their own testimonials of trauma, fear, stress, sadness, grief, loss, anxiety, despair. We had one little boy that, and he was a teenager, and he's been here for a couple of months. And it wasn't until a little while later that he was able to tell us how, he almost drowned crossing this river, and the harrowing rivers that, that are part of this journey, and what that means, and how even fear of water becomes so real in so many shapes and forms. And a lot of times we don't understand, like, why is this child having this behavior, or why are, youth acting in this way? But unless we really understand all the context, it's so important, and to really consider what is their loss of leaving home. And that's forced displacement. Um, uh, Restoring humanity, right, is honoring are who is in front of us with intention. Um, this was this picture of this little boy, captured by Sister Norma. Um, it just stuck his eyes. He's telling us, see me. I'm you, you're me. How do we honor the children and the families with deep intention? Not just knowing they're here, but really restoring this humanity that the United States has stripped from them, that society has stripped in ways that we talk about them or demoralize, or have conversations that don't include immigration advocacy or support, or really even recognize that they're in our schools and our classrooms, and that we just, want to lump them in as just another child, but yet they want to be honored and seen for who they are. There's a little girl that I wanted to share a story about. And this little girl, I'll share the story and then I'll tell you the recent update. Um, when I work at the border, I use art. And I want to say a beautiful shout out to the presentation before us, because what beauty with music and storytelling, and how do we use the arts with the children that we work with. But she and I, with all the children, I would take blank canvases, and I would just have them draw at the border, or color, or use marker to tell their story with me. And it didn't have to be their story; it could be whatever they wanted to share. But in this case, she drew her family, and if you look at this, she put her dad, um, her mom, her brother, her, and her little sister. And those dots are tears that they're crying. And on the bottom here at the corner, she says, "Ama al pro." She says, "Ama al prójimo como a ti mismo," which means love your neighbor as yourself. And she says, "Hi, I'm Genesis, and I want to leave from here because I can't be happy and I can't sleep." And then she drew the river, which has the crocodile that you see in it, or the alligator. And it has at the end bridge, which is actually, that's actually the border, crossing the border right there. And on the other side is her aunt, and then the police, which is the immigration and ICE. She leaves her cell phone number, which I try to blur out, but she put all their phone numbers. And when I looked at this, I realized this was many ways like an SOS for help. And I went back and I said, I'm from Texas originally. So I said, I didn't realize that there's alligators in this river. Um, but when she shared this photo, I had to go back and I talked to her family, and then I researched it, and it said that, yeah, alligators were introduced into the river as a part of immigration and ICE enforcement control. But what I also saw is the danger of what these children were being forced to take baths in this river as the only way of survival. I worked with her for 2 years. We exchanged chats and WhatsApp and phone calls and back and forth to the border with visits in Mexico as part of my work. And ultimately, we were able to watch the MPP ban lift when President Biden was elected. And yet, at the same time, there's still very harsh immigration realities right now at the border. But she was one of the families that were able to come through. And she arrived in, I think, March during the pandemic. Um, and this will be her first year going to school. This will be her first semester going to school in person. And during the summer, we had a summer camp. And one of the days we were at the camp, through my program of ALAS, I'm the director, founder and director of a nonprofit named Ayudando Latinos a Soñar in Half Moon Bay. And we use the arts and culture, music and dance and counseling program that we have, and all the cultural arts as a healing space. And so we were able to have her come and visit our camp. And one day she started crying. And we reached out and, we talked and gave her a hug and just spoke with her. And what we realized is like, just what I'm saying, all the other kids were laughing and having fun and really enjoying the camp. And while she was too, she for the first time, she felt the difference of language, the difference of acculturation, the difference of identity. Also, probably just sitting with the reality of, you know, who am I in this school space? Who am I in this community? And so we used that moment to rally kids, and they came together and they all, saw and reached out and said, we want to be friends. And well, this huge, beautiful opportunity happened. But I think my point is that um, we really do need to understand the deeper experiences that children have had, that asylum seeker children have had, and how do we welcome, how do we create space, and how do we provide counseling that really is relevant to their experiences. Another part of my work has been before the tent camps, I worked with many children in detention, ICE detention, children that were forced to be left alone 10 years and under with La Migra in ICE, with the Mylar silver blankets that you see on the news. And this was another image that a little boy drew for me. Sorry, I'm trying to move my screen. And I wasn't expecting, this to come, but after this little one started drawing, other children came to our table, and they all began to share images of ICE detention and themselves being in cages and what that looked like, and hearing the stories of what they felt in that moment. And then fast forward, seeing them come into the United States, New York, Virginia, Florida, Texas, California, and still being in touch with me and saying, I got my first backpack. I went to my first classroom. I'm struggling in school, or our family's hungry and we're sending them food miles and miles away, and what that looks like, right? So I think that it's so important to think about that what we saw in the news, what has happened is still very real in the minds and hearts of those that have journeyed here. I'm gonna just share that some of in school counseling, I know it's really important as we look at the mental health, but I think that for this group, some very important considerations are that they're arriving with little to no support and do not have anchors in the community to connect them to resources. And everyone thinks, well, there's a lot of social services, there's this, there's that, but they're not going to find it unless you really guide them and be able to support them. Sometimes school is going to be the only place that children are at that have a community. And so having your trust is so important as counselors or folks working in the schools to be able to give them this extra hand of support. I shared about the internalized notion of other and how do we support them to see the strength and beauty of who they are. A lot of families are confused, disorganized, and chaos and struggling alone. And understanding basic resources as a part of your work is so critical. Um, Teaching and orienting client to the community and the environment around them is so important. Really thinking about how do we create community for them? How do we help them adjust? Everyone needs resources, making sure you do a thorough needs assessment. And an assessment of support systems is so huge. How do you really think about what is their support system to bridge them to community? And merging your work with immigration considerations is also necessary. So it's not just that about that child and family learning, but if you can think beyond and say, does this family need immigration support? Yes, they do. And how can we help them find that? Or how can we help them link to that? Is so important because while that child sits in the classroom, that child is worried about if their family can get deported or if they will have to be forced back into very complicated situations. And they're still in survival mode. So I just want to quickly go over clinical and therapeutic considerations. For adults, issues that have been part of the work we have seen is processing grief, the loss of family and community because of forced displacement, suddenly and unplanned. Many of them were not prepared to leave. Addressing depression, isolation, fear, stress, and heightened anxiety. The loss of their identity and reshaping identity here in the US, cultural factors. How can they recreate elements of home? How can they create memories, music, song, food, dance, culture? Like, how can that be another piece? A constant state of the unknown and fear of the future. Healing the trauma. And with children, the journey has been really difficult for them. How do you create safe spaces for them to share what they've gone through using play therapy, art, plática circles, poems, recordings, and holding the trauma that is often continuous and cycling? It's so important to know that these children don't just forget. They come back in and out of these memories, smells, triggers, fears, stressors, worries. Living with their family in high stress too here is difficult. And considering what they enter their spaces daily is important. Family therapy is recommended, if possible, and home visits and being in direct contact with the parent or caregiver is really important because with these children, it's so necessary to see their whole family, to see what's happening and to truly understand. Supporting youth with resources in their spaces of school and community is critical. And assessing for basic needs and establishing routines is really important as well. So I just, wanted to end this piece with just remembering what you all are always doing, that our work begins with building connection and inspiring hope. And I think that this population of children really needs a cushion of love and a cushion of community that is in many ways similar, but in also other ways different. And so I just want to inspire you all to really think, how are we being present with newcomer children, asylum seeking children? And what are our services we're offering? And is there more that we can be doing? And with that, I wanted to share my resources, my information. This is so. I also am a author of a book for teachers and counselors that can use that talks about undocutrauma. It's a little girl, Sophia, who she's a citizen child, but her parents are undocumented. And she's been holding a secret for a long time that has impacted her at school and beyond. The fear of her parents being deported. And it's a fear that she never talks about. And in many ways, it's a fear that these children are also holding, a fear of deportation, a fear of being removed, a fear of their family being removed. And so it's called Love and Monsters in Sophia's Life. I just wanted to share a little bit about that. You can find it on Amazon, but it really tells a story for teachers and counselors to begin addressing this secret that sometimes nobody really understands how to talk about. And I'd love to answer any questions or thoughts that you have about my work or the experiences that we've seen or counseling practices. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Belinda. Let's give her a strong hand, and I also give her a hand for the wonderful work you've been doing in a really dire situation. I just want to, before we take questions, want to remind everybody that the Oxford Symposium and the Institute for School-Based Family Counseling have adopted a policy that we remain neutral and empathic in our talk about issues that are socially, politically, economically loaded. So let us refrain from engaging in a political debate about the rightness or wrongness of what happened with these children and focus on what Belinda has brought us this evening or today in a wonderful presentation of the work that she has been doing with the children that come out of very traumatic situations. So put up your hand, anybody with a comment or a question. I do have to, while I'm waiting for, oh, there is Rita with a question. Okay, Rita, unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I took the presentation very personal, just because I am a first generation Latina myself, and coming how do you say it? I appreciate the fact that now in today's society, just where I'm located in, there are now more resources for immigration families, for children. And luckily, when it comes to the cultural background, and just speaking on my Hispanic side being Mexican, they are now becoming more accepting when it comes to mental health, that, children do go through trauma. They are going through their, depression, anxiety, everything, as well as adults. And that's a very hard cultural barrier to break down, because, where I'm from, the mental health is just seen very lunatic. It's not taken very seriously. But I am happy that to, just share that, what's it called, at least here in my area in California, there's all these kinds of resources for families, because especially, like I mentioned before, I'm first generation myself. I know how it is to live and see my parents under fear and not being able to do stuff, because it's very risk-takeful for them. And you don't want to put that pressure on them. And then of course, also vice versa, me being the oldest daughter, the first daughter from two parents who are migrated over here, there's a lot of stress on that too, because I got to see that more of that as a female Hispanic than my other siblings did. But I just want to say thank you. This is a presentation I know my mom would have loved to sit in, just because we have family, of course, who had to stay in those detention centers. And that was back in the 80s, back in the 70s, back in the 90s. So it's completely different because that's a story that they're not willing to open up
Right.
else because of all that trauma that happened and
Right.
all the exposure they went through. So, I mean, this was a presentation my mom would have loved to sit through just because it's something that's relatable, something that she needs to understand that, you know, she could help out as well. I want to do my part. I did message you privately in the group chat, but I just want to say thank you. And I really appreciate your presentation at a both personal and professional level.
Thank you, Rita. And you know what? I want to honor your family as Edo is too in this journey. And, you know, I think for me, I've always said that the immigrant experience, that immigrant strength, like it teaches me so much more than any book could ever teach. So I know you're a legacy of that. So gracias. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita, and thank you, Belinda. Any more questions or comments? Yes, Sudia, just unmute yourself first.
Yeah, okay, got it. Thank you. I was just going to share that I did a project with Salvadorian immigrants living here in the Bay Area, talking about the challenges of getting here, how it happened, and we did individual interviews with some of the participants, and then we came together to share what we had heard. And then we took the words of the Salvadorian immigrants here and brought them back to a workshop that we were doing in El Salvador with Salvadorian teachers, and had them read some of the things that the immigrants said. And there were a lot of tears in the room of people really not realizing that the relatives who had left, who are immigrants here, were having such challenges, and it was so intense, and that they never realized how difficult life was here. They expected, oh, you're going to America, everything's going to be glorious. And to learn that it wasn't was really surprising to them. And then when we did our work with educators, communities, indigenous communities in Oaxaca, we told them that we had done this narrative therapy experience with Salvadorian immigrants, and that many of the things they said seemed to be very similar to what we're hearing from Mexican immigrants. And because in our schools, we work with both populations, and sometimes there's conflict between the Mexican and a Salvadorian populations, you know, one trying to think that they're better than the other, but that we talked about how their struggles are similar, and that we as educators, school psychologists, try and bring together the populations to understand their similar challenges. So we asked permission to read some of the things from Salvadorian immigrants in our workshop in Oaxaca. And the Oaxacans were crying after hearing the words of the Salvadorians. And then they asked if next time we went to El Salvador, could they come with us and meet the people? So it was just a very heartwarming and intense experience. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Surya. I think as there are so many things that one can learn from immigrants, from multicultural. I worked before with the topic what's called third culture kids, where children have to move away from, or with their parents, move away. Now, these were not traumatized because they had to leave, but their parents took them on their routes through the world. And it's always very interesting to learn about the grief that they must have for what they left behind. And the grief that remains with them, because let's say a grandmother dies back home, and they can't go back, they can't go there. And here they are in this new country, which is supposedly better, but they cannot connect with their relatives that are still back in the old country, and they know what the situation was in the old country. So it is very challenging to work with children in this particular situation. I see Sue has a comment, a question. Just unmute yourself first. Thank you, Sue.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Belinda. That was just it's a beautiful project and a beautiful presentation. And I was very touched in particular by your story of the shoes, and thinking too how the light is so rarely shown on us on this story, and that it also applies not only to what's happening right now, but to many previous generations of children that have come in over the water and been in refugee camps at different times. And I am certain that just as you found, they were completely unacknowledged and their stories were never told and they were never welcomed. So thank you for your work.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you so much. That means a lot.
In fact, I sent a couple of links out as you were talking, hoping that people could join on, because I knew that you were actually speaking for them. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It means a lot.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Belinda. Any more commentary, comments, questions? Coming back to my statement about the grief, do you have particular strategies that you work with these children to deal with the grief that they are experiencing, over and above the trauma, of course, but specifically the grief that they experience for leaving behind, letting go of the past?
Yeah, I think what we're really trying to continue to work and learn what is the best for that, right? Because in many ways, what we have been doing, for example, we have a group of children right now that we're working with from Honduras. And so what we've seen is helping them to create a community of them to be able to share, like favorite foods, favorite stories, places that they love to be, stories about family. We found that creation of community here, or creation of community as a whole, really helps them to be able to process some of that grief collectively and individually. A lot of it is drawing and working through that storytelling and being able to share about who they were there and share about their family and not letting go of that. Because I think what happens is that when they come here, people don't try to explore that other side of them. They don't, really try to engage that. And it's almost like a cutting off of being forced to just leave this as a second chapter, a new chapter in our life, and that's completely over. And so part of the grief work is really undoing that and being able to embrace that is still a part of their life, and that, through WhatsApp, a lot of them talk to families from home and they're engaging in those conversations. So I think bringing it into the present here is really important too.
I had one of the stories in the Third Culture Kids was actually the grief of letting go of an animal, a pet that they had to leave behind. So one sometimes forget that how attached a child gets to a pet, and then they have to leave it behind because they can't carry it with them across the border.
Oh,
And, so even a pet, one has to go through the bereavement process of letting go. And with the pet, you can't communicate with WhatsApp, unfortunately.
Thank you for sharing that. That is something. And what you bring up is that there's so many things that are so big, but they might seem very little, but they're huge to their heart, right?
Oh, yes.
And it impacts like their performance in school, their functioning, their adjustment, just everything. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
As I'm talking, I'm actually thinking that this is what the teacher should know as well, because if I have a teacher, a child in my class who does not, who is grieving, as I say, for a pet, it might sound insignificant for an adult who's in an entitled or a privileged environment. Now this child is grieving for a pet, and I make fun of it that could be extremely a further traumatization of the child. So thank you very much for the wonderful work you're doing. I appreciate that very much. Any more questions, comments? Then I'm going to ask Nancy Iverson to do a final take the appreciation. Thank you, Nancy.
So Belinda, thank you very much. I think the first thing that comes up for me is you are a beautiful storyteller.
Oh,
So as your presentation unfolded, it's no mystery then that you would have an incredible capacity to draw out stories and to honor stories and to help us all learn about searching for the backstories too. So you modeled beautifully the work that you're doing, and it's something near and dear to my heart. So I really appreciate that. And I mean, even the example of like bringing up the backstory of what even happened to get people to a certain place, not just what they're facing now and what comes next, but that is just a lovely integration of weaving in all these different chapters and then building the next chapter. I also love your artful use of language, and especially the welcoming newcomers. What a beautiful way to frame that work and to really make it a heartfelt practice instead of something that goes in a clipboard or something. And then of course your final piece about building connection and inspiring hope. I think that, again, it's part of your beautiful art of telling stories. What a wonderful way to encourage us to move to the next chapter of whatever the story might be. So thank you very much.
thank you so much, Nancy. And to all of you, it's really special to be able to be in community with all of you. And I'm just grateful that for the work that all of you are doing. So thank you for your affirmation, and I appreciate your kind words.
Okay, so let us give Belinda, and particularly the work she's doing, a great hand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. So we're going to not take a little break now. We're going to move straight forward to the final event for today, and that is the award ceremony. And I'm going to hand over to Jackie now, who is our presenter of the